Wes of Aquarimax Pets here. Like my isopod hat? If you like it, let me know in the comments. I see we have Frank the Tank, Aunt Sandy Skinks, Laura Taylor, Random T, Mike Fernandez, all in the chat. And back to the normal time because my schedule has changed again. Yeah, it was great for it was great to have some chance to interact with some of the folks who don't generally get to interact in the chat because they're not allowed to attend the live streams just by their schedule. But it's also good to be back with those who can do it on this schedule. So I guess if life were fair, I'd be on vacation all the time and I could do it half on one time and half the other. But life isn't fair all the time, is it? Well, I wanted to start out with some Patreon questions. Now that I've welcomed a few of you here, I see Tobias and Theropod Hunter have joined as well, and Silver Tears, Tennyson Kingsley. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. So, who can be the first person to name the isopod on my hat, meaning providing the scientific name of this isopod? Who can do that? Young Lad, welcome. Supreme Gecko, Wally's here. Happy Wednesday as well to you. I'm hoping that this my light's going to work. This light on the left was kind of freaking out right before the stream, and I think I got it fixed, but we'll see how it goes. So let's see. The Pokemon. Your Porcelias are up to about 500. Nice. Tennyson's got it. Porcellia werneri, that is the species indeed. Possibly the most beautiful skirted isopod out there. Definitely a contender. And yeah, Young Lad, glad to have you back now that we're on this schedule again. So I'm going to pull up. We had quite a few Patreon questions today. I'm going to pull those up and see what we got. So first of all, Harvey has a number of questions. We'll start out with those. And then Farouche has some questions too. So Harvey says, first question, what are the reasons for exchanging isopod substrate every few months? So I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the frass and the ammonia. Well, yeah, the frass definitely, ammonia can be an issue, but isopods are funny in that they'll often release ammonia in a gaseous form, if I'm not mistaken, and so we can vent some of that out just with good ventilation and get rid of some of that. But I would say that there are a lot of reasons why we need to change the substrate, but there's also ways to get around that, at least for a time. One thing that Oren McMonagle mentioned in his book, Isopod Zoology, is that he has had isopod cultures in which he does not change the substrate until the substrate is so high. Basically, it's as high as it can be in the enclosure and not provide an escape route. You know, he can sometimes waits that long, at least in some enclosures, that the substrate will build up quite a bit, and that can take a long time. It can take years. So, and that's not necessarily bad. You know, these cultures are doing well for him as he does that. There are some reasons to change the substrate. One of them would be nutrients, of course. If the isopods are turning the entire substrate to frass, then they have to rely on other sources of nutrients. And now, topping the substrate off, adding new leaf litter, especially decomposing leaf litter, adding wood, adding just topping it off with other substrate items can be okay. But there are some other reasons. One of them is that these nutrients, as they get depleted in the substrate, the isopods population, while the nutrient levels are pretty consistent, population can be going up. What with supplemental food you're adding, all the good stuff in the substrate, their population can be going up. And then suddenly they may get to a point where the nutrient levels are depleted and you're still providing the same amount of supplementary food, and you might get to a point where you get a crash of your population, because suddenly, if everything else remains the same but the nutrient levels suddenly decreased, you might get that. That can happen. So it can be a good idea to change the substrate for that reason. I very rarely change all of my substrate at once, but it can. But doing a partial substrate change can really help prevent that, especially if you do it frequently enough. I see that Tennyson is making mention of something that he does in his substrate, saying, I use calcium carbonate used for reptiles in my substrates. My calcium and as a soil pH management system as such. Also lumpwood, hardwood, charcoal, ground up. Okay, so this is a good point that you're relating to, Tennyson, is that these calcium in the substrate can be important, not just because isopods need calcium, and they can get that from other sources, things like fish food and leaf litter, they can get calcium. But as a pH regulator, calcium carbonate can be helpful, and if you have a depleted substrate, in other words, the isopods have eaten basically all the calcium out of it, you can get pH crashes in your substrate, which is bad, can cause things like certain fungal growths to occur. It can be a bad thing in a lot of ways. So that is another reason why we change our substrate out. Although, personally, I usually change between 1/3 and 2/3 of the substrate out at a time, never all of it, because you want the microbiological activity, fungal, bacterial, protozoal, and so on, in that substrate to be preserved. And if you replace all of it at once with sterile substrate, that's not going to happen. So hopefully that helps a little bit there, Harvey. Are there any indicators that can help tell if the substrate needs to be changed? One of mine that I look for is it mostly frass, which you know what frass is. It's the isopod waste, solid waste of isopods, and it's typically, for those of you who may not be aware of this yet, I'm sure many of you are, roughly rectangular, kind of flattish pieces resting on the substrate. If you see a lot of that on the surface of the substrate, and especially if you dig down a little bit and that's what you see it's made out of, it is high time to change some of the substrate. So that's the sign that I would say is the most telltale sign of substrate needing to change. And another question, well, there's two more. Why do the tips of sphagnum moss turn black after a while? You know, I haven't really seen that myself. I read somewhere that sphagnum moss can start to turn black if there's too much humic acid buildup, but I have not experienced that I'm aware of. I do have some live sphagnum moss growing in one of my vivariums in with my dart frogs, and I have, of course, this sphagnum moss that I put in my other, my isopod enclosures and things like that. I haven't really noticed it turning black myself. And then another question, is there anything you would do with aquarium and vivarium pets if you had infinite time? If I had infinite time, there are very few things I wouldn't do with aquarium and vivarium pets. Okay, well, I would probably build my carboniferous exhibit that I've talked about, and one of my kids have talked about, basically getting as many plants and animals that may not have existed in the Carboniferous time, but plants and animals that are very closely related to ones that existed in the Carboniferous period, make a huge vivarium, like room-sized at least, vivarium like that. That's something I'd do. I would certainly be keeping a lot more creatures if I had infinite time. I'd have to figure out how time management works, but when you have infinite time, because if you want to switch between activities, how do you make that work? But that's something I would do. I would be keeping more of almost everything, because I'm so fascinated by so many things. But let's just say that Carboniferous exhibit would be up there. So Silver Tears, congrats on your isopod Monkai, that's awesome. The Mantis Garden and Ian Alicia and let's see, anybody else who's come in since Yotaro's here, the Keep. So the Keep, do you mean like they have a pattern, like they've got the sort of powder blue background and then some white spots on them? That sounds pretty cool. Wendy Hickson having some ladybird spiders. I have never kept that Stegodiphyus dumicula. Never kept that species. I've only kept one species of ladybird spiders. Well, there's Don Gallagher. Rod Sprague is here. Awesome. Okay, let's see. So hopefully that answered your questions, Harvey. Some great questions there. Thank you, Sandy, also for noticing the mistake I made on the timing, so I fixed that in the post on Patreon. It said 5:39, which was erroneous. Of course, I started a lot earlier than that. Let's see. Farouche had a question. Do you know how to find and collect the tiny species of European pseudoscorpions found in our gardens? Any sort of trap exists for them? They're about springtail sized. Only found one once into the house just as I accidentally flushed it down the shower drain. Oh no! I've seen a variety of tiny arthropods in the garden, but these pseudoscorpions seem incredibly stealthy. Well, my suggestion in that case would be to get a Berlese funnel. And a Berlese funnel, probably you'll hear different people pronounce it different ways, like Berlese funnel, whatever. The essential idea is that you get a container and you put something like a damp paper towel on the bottom of it. The damp paper towel serves as a place for these small invertebrates to land and without desiccating, and it also provides a surface of contrast, the white color of the paper towel, so I would use a white one, not a patterned one, helps the little invertebrates to stand out against it so you can see them more easily. You put a jar or a bin, something like that, and then you put a funnel that funnels down into this container with the damp paper towel on the bottom. And then in the funnel you put damp leaf litter that you have collected from your garden. Above that you put a light bulb. In the past, incandescent light bulbs, when Berlese funnels were invented, as far as I know, they generally used incandescent bulbs. So you'd probably want to use some kind of bulb that produced a little heat. And not a whole lot. You don't want to make it excessive, because then you'll just cook whatever is in the leaves. But just enough so that the leaf litter starts drying up on top and getting a little warm. And this, of course, many invertebrates, what do when they feel too warm, too dry? They start going down, because they're more likely to get to moist areas that way. So they go down through the leaf litter and they filter themselves out of the leaf litter and land on the white paper towel, and then you can see them clearly, and you can go through those and see if you can find pseudoscorpions. This is a time-honored method for finding small invertebrates, and people have used it with great success. As long as it's fairly damp leaf litter. If you find some bone-dry leaf litter, there's not going to be as many critters in it. So definitely worth a try to use this Berlese funnel. If you want to look it up, you just do a search for Berlese funnel, I believe is the spelling. Then you will get some more information about it, maybe some different styles you can try and so on. So I see that Aftech and Space Madness have also shown up. Cool. So, all right, Tobias, congrats on the 7 blue death feigning beetles and the fact that they're starting to mate, so hopefully you'll get some babies. So Space Madness, Gestroid typically have a large number of babies. I would say at least 50, maybe even more. So generally when I see babies, I see a lot of them. So if you can only see one, it could just mean they're all hiding. It could mean something else has happened, but I would say that it's highly likely that you will find more very soon. They do tend to hide a little bit, more so than some other isopods when they're really tiny. So it may be you wait a week to a month or so and you may find you have a lot more than you thought you did. Hopefully so. Let's see. Do we have any other comments or questions? I don't think so. I think those are the only comments and questions we had on Patreon. So I'm going to put this over here so it is out of the way. Ooh, sorry, just one second. Got to fix that. Just dropped some things. There we go. Dropped my portable phone charger on the ground. All right. Yeah, see, Theropod Hunter, that sounds appropriate to Gestroid, so that is more along the lines of what I would expect. So just keep an eye out, Space Madness, for more babies. I'm just going through the chat, seeing if there's anything else I missed. All right. Well, I've been trying to, I've been working on editing videos from my Sky Island Adventures trip. I'm really excited to share them with you. Got to see so many amazing things. Remember, if you haven't scheduled the Sky Island Adventure and you're in a position to do so, I would recommend you look up Sky Island Adventures on bugsandcyberspace.com and figure out how you need to get a reservation, because it's so cool. So fun. Totally excited for that. And Yotaro, how's the tarantula doing? Well, molted since the last video. I would say molted about, actually it was when I was in Arizona. It was either when I was in Arizona or right after I got back. Not sure. Because I feel like I came back and the first time I looked at the tarantula, I think I saw the molt. So, did molt. So much more blue, so much bigger now. Really hoping it's a female. I contacted Alex at Tarantula Haven with the picture and said, what do you think? I got a good ventral photo, good close-up, pretty good close-up ventral photo. And he said, yeah, it looks like it's probably female, so I'm really excited about that. Eating well, has eaten a couple of times since I got back, 2 or 3 times since I got back from my other trip down to the southern part of our state. I think it's eaten twice since then. I didn't feed it between the 2 trips. There was the Arizona trip and then there was the southern Utah trip. Didn't feed it between because I wasn't sure exactly when it had molted and wanted to give it, several days for it to harden up. So I ended up giving it a little over a week before it hardened up, and then it was ready to eat. So Tennyson, what do you think is the most underrated genus? I'd say it's either Venezilo or Trachelopus, or Trachelopus, however you want to say it. Good question. Oh, Random T, let me see if I can see this picture. I haven't seen it. Sometimes it can be weird to see things on Patreon. I know that sounds weird, but let me see if I can find it. Ah! Okay, there it goes. Oh, there are some pictures that I missed on here. I see that Harvey posted his book Isopod Zoology and the Aquarimax mug too. That's pretty awesome. And it says, my new enclosure for my millipedes, marked Random T. Cool. What kind of millipedes do you have in there? Enclosure looks really nice. Tempted to add something to cohab with the millipedes, maybe a beetle. Okay. Well, you always have the issue with millipedes that they're going to be pretty vulnerable during a molt. And depending on the type of beetle, that could be an issue. Some beetles would not hesitate to nibble on them. Some beetles might ignore them though, so depending on what you put in there, you might be able to get it to work. I would definitely, the thing is, since millipedes do molt and tend to molt underground, but sometimes do surface molts, even if you got something that doesn't burrow, it might end up being opportunistic. Sometimes even mostly herbivorous creatures can be a little bit opportunistic when something molts because it's so soft and edible. You know what I mean? So Tobias' question, if papayas are albino little C's, can they breed together? In other words, Cubaris murina papaya and Cubaris murina little C, which is just the wild type, then yes, they can. And because papayas are a type of albino, apparently, what you would get, most likely, in the first generation are just a bunch of hets, meaning they look wild type, but they're heterozygous for the albino gene. And if you cross them with papayas or you cross them with each other, you would get a certain proportion of papayas. If you cross them directly with visual papayas, you'd get a higher proportion. And if you cross them with themselves, you'd get approximately 25% of the papayas, and the rest would look like wild types, and some would be hets, and some would be homozygous for the wild types. I see that Julie's here as well. Excellent. So back to the question with Venezilo Trachelopus. I've never kept Trachelopus. I need some Trachelopus rathkai. I need the pumpkin pods. That's the one I want. The orange pumpkin pods. Because they're approved in the US. No reason why I couldn't keep them. So I would like to get those. Venezilo I really like too. I've only kept Venezilo parvis. I have the Venezilo parvis Dalmatian. I'd like to get the kumquats. And Tennyson was the one who showed me, it's the Venezilo from Oaxaca area in Mexico, I think it is. I can't remember the sign. It's a Oaxacensis or something like that. Oaxacense. I don't remember exactly what the name is. But they're like little zebras except the stripes are red. Absolutely beautiful. They're really small, but they're beautiful Venezilo, and I think those would be fantastic. Probably won't be able to get them approved for the U.S. just because they probably don't occur in the U.S. They only occur in a very small area of Mexico as far as we know. So Oniscus is definitely underrated. I've never kept Philotia myself, so I can't really comment on it. But I have kept Oniscus, Acellus, a couple different types, and I like them a lot. Especially I think the BC Maples are my favorite, but I also like the Mardi Gras. Okay, so random tea, Narcissus americanus you're going to keep in there. Okay. I wonder if something like best beetles would be okay with the millipedes. It seemed like you'd have a pretty good chance. They have similar habitat. They like to eat the rotting wood, and I wonder if they'd be okay. That would be really cool. And those of you who have commented about the audio, yeah, I don't have my microphone because it's kind of been malfunctioning lately, and so I'm trying to figure out what's going on with that. So I'm not using my microphone, which is probably interfering a little bit with the audio, so I apologize for that. And Lush Wizard, glad to hear that information has been helpful for working with your isopods. That's awesome. And Dave M. Oh, thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. Which podcast was it? I'm just curious. I've been a guest on a few, so I'm wondering. Yeah, I'm not too surprised, Random T. The Cubaris marinas are pretty crazy breeders. Oh, Kimberly. Excellent. Kimberly Kitty. We were on Sky Island Adventures at the same time. We were in the same group. It was a really fun group, too. I enjoyed meeting you and hanging out and doing all the adventures that we did. It was really cool. We had 6 of us, Kimberly and her husband Keith, and then we had Jessica from the Portland Insectarium and Ingrid, and then my wife and I came, and then we had, of course, Peter and Jesse as our hosts and guides. So it was so cool. It was really fun. So once again, nice to see you here in the stream, and it was so fun to have the Sky Island adventure with you. So rice water, Daniel Kim. Oh, glad you enjoyed the pseudoscorpion video. They are really fun. I'm hoping to get a new batch of baby pseudoscorpions soon. Okay, so Tennyson, it's Venezilo oaxacanus. Okay, cool. Oh, Rod, yeah, adding milkweeds is an excellent idea. Get some of the milkweed insects. In fact, speaking of that, I saw a monarch butterfly for the first time this year on our property. We typically get them in late summer and into fall, but we don't see very many. We have bushes that attract them, but I think we saw maybe 3 last year, but a lot of years we only see 1. But in any case, it's really nice to see them, and we saw 1 today. That was the first one I'd seen this year, so that was fun. So Laura Taylor's asking, do I have a genetic video, or can you do one about mixing morphs and how to breed to get a certain trait or what not to do? I do have one of those, and it is part of my isopod playlist. Why can't I remember it? The isopod care playlist. I don't remember what the number is, but if somebody can look that up, one of the mods, it's breeding isopod morphs, I think it's called, and post it in the chat, that would be fantastic. It explains how I bred some morphs, the process I went through, and how you can basically do it. If you have some species or some morphs in mind specifically and you want to ask me, would this work, I can give you some ideas. But that video is a good one to check out for that purpose. So Dante and Laura, go ahead and check that out. And Sirena, welcome. And Tobias, yes, I do need a better microphone. The microphones that I bought last time are they had a kind of a short life. They worked really well for a while, but they're kind of kicking out on me, so I do need a better mic. Wow, Doomboy, you got all kinds of cool isopods. I don't even have a lot of those, although I do have Ukraine Pied and some chocolate zebras, a couple. That's awesome. Oh, Julie, you got a wild Mediterranean house gecko in your house. Those can be tricky to find. I have found some success with small geckos. Just leaving out foods that will attract them. And Frank has a good idea that's related to what I was saying. So hopefully that helps as well. He suggested putting feeders in a sealed container, turn off the lights, and have one light on the insect. I can see that working too. And yeah, but it's worth a shot anyway. It may just end up finding its way out, but we'll see. We used to have a lot of geckos in our house when we lived in Hawaii. They'd just show up all the time. Morning geckos, Indo-Pacific geckos, and what was the other one? Another house gecko, common house gecko, the Hemidactylus frenatus, I think it was. Okay, Dave, it was on Joe Phelan's channel. Yeah, that's cool. I remember doing that with him. He actually came on my channel too. That was fun. He really helped me as I was getting into keeping corn snakes, keeping our first corn snake. He helped a lot, and I listened. It's too bad he's not doing the podcast anymore, but then his successor did a great podcast too, but she hasn't done any recently either, which is sad because they were both good podcasts. Oh, and there's Major right there. Great. I did answer your questions, or at least gave my best attempt at answering your questions in the earlier part of the stream, so you can check that out. So, Serena, is there a list of isopod breeders sorted by isopod species? I'm having some problems trying to find Porcelia ornatus, high yellow, and Ukraine pied. I don't know if there's a list like that. I know that Ukraine pied, I can't ship Porcelia ornatus, and I don't ship Porcelia ornatus, but I do have Ukraine pied. As far as Porcelia ornatus, there may be some you could try. I know a number of breeders who have it. Are they just out of stock? Smugbug probably has those pretty often. Who else? Maybe Wally Supreme Gecko might have them. Bug Hub might have them. Pod Solo might have them. I could go on. I would check. And Tobias, congrats on finding and IDing your first wild isopod. That's fantastic. It's always fun to find them, too, just wherever they are. That's one of the few species I can find around here. That's where the night golds that I've been working on for a few years come from. They're just kind of a higher yellow one. So Rod Sprague, has anyone bred Armadillidium vulgare to be consistently the natural dark gray without any spotting or modeling? I haven't worked on that. It does seem that there are some strains that have males that come out consistently gray. Some strains in which the spotting and modeling, a few where the spotting and modeling is on males as well, just as much as on females. But it seems more naturally occurring in most strains that the males have fewer or none, and the females have more. So Ramingo, doing okay. Life has been crazy and busy, but we've had some interesting adventures lately. And so we're doing all right, the animals and us, humans. And a new armadillidium video soon. Which species of armadillidium do I have that I haven't covered yet? I don't think there are very many. I'd have to look into that and see. Something to think about. Oh, Tennyson, yeah, that's a good person to check with. If anybody has worked with a jet black line, it seems like Kyle would be a guy who would totally do that because he's worked with so many different isopod strains, and some of the most time-honored and interesting strains in the hobby have, Kyle's been involved in producing them, like Dalmatian Porcelia scaber. He worked on that. I think he got some stock from someone else and refined and got them breeding and so on. The American line magic potions, the true magic potions. He's the one he didn't collect the first individuals, but he's the one who worked with them and selectively bred them into, to produce the yellow, the really high yellow coloration on magic potions, and a lot of other things he's worked on. Those are just some that people would know. Oh, young lad, you get the orange armadillidium vulgare. That's cool. They're not too uncommon, although I've never seen one, but I hear people find them in a lot of places. Okay, so Sirena, they're out of stock now. I am not out of stock on Ukraine Pride. I have not a huge amount, but enough that I can start selling again. I had to let them go for a few months to breed, but I could let go of a couple of starter cultures for sure at this point. I've got 2 bins of Ukraine Pride and they're doing okay, so I could make that happen. I've been renewing my permits, but the current permits I have don't expire for another few months, so I'm fine, and I'm done applying for all of the permits, so by the time the permits that I have now expire, my others should already be active, so I should be fine for that. And Ukraine Pride is cleared for shipping to most U.S. states. Oh yeah, I forgot about the How Now. The How Nows are a Lavis line. They're kind of like a caramel milkback, which is pretty cool. And the Gene Messine Scaber, yeah, I've been tempted to get the Gene Messine Scaber from him, too. So Tobias, Peace Scaber and Dairy Cow, typically Peace Scaber is a thinner bodied isopod proportionately than dairy cows. They're not exactly thin, but they are thinner than dairy cows, a longer bodied sort of proportion. Dairy cows are definitely wider, stockier than Porcelia scaber tend to be. You can tell scaber have a rougher body to them too. So if you look closely especially, but even if you don't look particularly closely, they have a more matte finish on them with a lot of bumps on their bodies, and Lavis tend to be more glossy and smooth. And that's what scaber and Lavis actually mean. So Porcelia scaber basically means little rough pig, and Porcelia lavis means little smooth pig. Oh, Tennyson, yeah, I believe the Witch's Brew ornatus. I think Kyle was the first one who isolated Witch's Brew ornatus too. Yes, that's true. I really like that morph. It's fantastic. So red isopod, young lad, interesting. So if an isopod is blue or purple, that can be an indication of iridovirus. But as far as red goes, you should be safe. There are people who work with red lines. So Cooper and Marshall, hello. Oh yeah, Witch's Brew Ornatus is seriously one of my favorites. Hmm. So Tobias, what morph were they being sold as when you bought them? Which morph of Porcelio Scaber? If you can send any pictures, especially some close-ups, some macro photos, I would be able to tell you if they're Laevis or Scaber. They have some really interesting lines. I don't remember, Tobias, where you are, but they have some really interesting lines of Scaber lately. There's one called a Tunisian Pied, which is, it looks like dairy cows in a Porcelio Scaber version. In other words, you look at Dalmatian, and they typically don't have very good patterning. You get individuals once in a while that have really nice contrast, high expression patterning, so a lot of dark, a lot of light, and you see a lot of contrast. Most of the time, Dalmatians are not like that. You get a Dalmatian, and you'll have a couple little flecks of color on it, the dark color, and the rest of it's just white. But dairy cows, on the other hand, most of them have quite a lot of contrast. But the high white dairy cows, or the white dairy cows, they're just called white Laevis, usually have very small markings, not a lot of expression on them. But there is a Tunisian Pied, Porcelio Scaber Tunisian Pied, that look a lot more like dairy cows. They have really consistent high patterns. They look super cool. I'm surprised they are not at least I haven't seen them in the US yet. I've only seen them in European places, but I would love to get those because they look fantastic. Okay, well, young lad, if it was pinkish red, that could be potentially an issue. Maybe it wasn't, but it could have been an issue. So maybe it was probably best that you didn't pick that one up. So I have kept Shiro Utsuri, and they seem to be they did pretty well for me for a while. And then I had some die off. I still have some, but they're pretty good breeders. And I've heard this from other people too. They seem to be prone sometimes, even though they're pretty prolific and seem to be doing well, sometimes you'll just get a random die-off, and I haven't quite figured that out yet. But, so I feel like I can't really give excellent advice on them because I just haven't had excellent success with them yet. So until I dial in the husbandry a little bit more on the Shiro Utsuri, I feel like I probably shouldn't say a whole lot about it. Yeah. That is one thing, Kimberly. They are out on display a lot. I like that. So, do you have any other tips about how to care for them? I'd love to know more about it. So, Dante, do you have any experience with springtails aside from Sinella curviceta? The temperate springtails I purchased from Josh's frogs don't seem to survive with my isopods. Well, I noticed that if I put Sinella curviceta and Folsomia candida with isopods, that both can do okay, but if both are in the same room, that the Sinella curviceta tend to just outcompete. They get into the bin of the Folsomia candida and take over, and they do so much better in with isopods typically. So I'm not sure why that is, but I have worked with, Folsomia candida. I still have those. In a clay culture, I find that typically the Folsomia candida will overtake the Sinella, but when they're in an isopod culture, the Sinella is the winner. And technically, I think they're not Sinella. Someone was saying they're Cecobria instead, and I can't remember the species name now, but the genus is Cecobria. But they're known in the hobby pretty widely still as Sinella curviceta. So I have also seen other types in my vivarium, like small silvers that just show up, and other ones that just show up somehow or other. But I haven't, purposefully worked with other types besides those two. Okay, so Kimberly says live plants in with them, humidity a little higher. Okay, good to know. And how's the ventilation? Do you do low or high with your Shiro Utsuri? See that theropod hunter's back. Oh, Sirena, yeah, the lemon sorbet ornatus. I've seen those, haven't kept them. And okay, good to know too. That's a nice tip. Armadillidium do tend to nibble on plants, but it sounds like Kimberly's had the experience that the Shiro Utsuri are not doing that. So that's nice. That would be a good example of potentially really nice conglobating display isopod then. It sounds like it has the making for that with low ventilation. Okay, cool. Well, Yotaro, thank you for joining in. I'm sorry you have to leave early, but I'm glad you were able to be here for part of the time. So theropod hunter, sorry about your frontage triangulatum culture. Okay, so Tennyson, yeah, the Sinella are probably really the Cecobria CF communis. Okay, thank you. Oh, maybe it's tenebricosa, actually, because I was thinking in my head, I was thinking about the Unus strigata, Entomobride Unus strigata, so it must be Cecobride tenebricosa. That makes sense. So yeah, nanophiles, let us know how yours said, what am I saying? Your Shiro Utsuri do if you put them in a like a terrarium type setup. That would be cool. What else has been going on lately? Okay, so Tobias, sorry to hear that. Maybe you need to contact the seller and say, these seem to be white lavis, what can you do for me? You know, just be honest, be direct, but you don't have to be, you know, just say, in good faith, I'm just contacting you to let you know that these appear to be white lavis, and what I was looking for were actually Porcellio scaver. Can you help me out? And if they're mixed with Dalmatians, now that's kind of a suspect sort of situation. Like, that's not what you would expect to get from a reputable seller. I can understand them accidentally putting the wrong isopods in a shipment. I've done that a couple of times. Not often, but I've done it. And, you know, I'm trying to make sure I can help the people out and fix it because it's my fault. But actually mixing them when you're selling as one and you're mixing that with a completely different species, that's, yeah, I would definitely ask for some help with that. Oh, yep, Major, you did ask about cork bark. That is true. Sorry about that. Somehow I missed that when I was reading through it. Cork bark, I actually have sourced it from several different places. I've purchased it from the Biodude, and usually I'll get a bulk cork order. Biodude, I've purchased it from, let's see, New England Herpeticulture. And I've purchased it from, where else have I purchased it from? I'm trying to remember. Those are a couple of them. Those are a couple of them. I'm trying to remember if I've really purchased large amounts of cork from anybody else. Definitely New England Herpeticulture, they have like a bag of mixed cork pieces you can get for pretty cheap. And the Biodude, I bought a big old box of it. I've had sometimes people just give me cork too. My last box of cork, somebody just gave it to me, so I didn't have to buy it. But those are two sources that I've used. Okay, so Tobias, I see. You mixed them yourself. So the Lavis came and you thought, okay, these are Dalmatians. I'm putting them in with my other Dalmatians. I see, and that can happen. So Kimberly, how's my Vinegaroon doing? He is a beautiful specimen and doing really well. He's been taking food readily. He's taken crickets and superworms. I think maybe only one superworm, but been taking food from tongs. Digging really well. I put a deep substrate. There's probably about, I don't know, like 10 inches of substrate in the enclosure, and it's the Biodude Terra Sahara, so that they can really dig and retain those burrows. And I put some big pieces of cork bark, kind of partially in the substrate, so it has something to dig around and under and so on. Doing really well, and it was pretty thin when I got it. It's starting to get a little bit, filled out, because the wild ones are typically a little thinner, and you don't want to get them too fat. But I'm trying to fatten it up a little bit so that I can brumate it. I'm going to try to brumate it this winter, kind of more in an intentional way, because they will sort of brumate on their own typically during the winter and molt during that time. But I'm going to try to do it with reduced temperature, reduced light, all that kind of stuff. So I'm letting it fatten up a little bit for that. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. It's a really cool specimen. Pet Expos is a good place too. Tennyson's mentioning, yeah, they'll have pretty good prices because they bring in a whole bunch of cork, and they don't want to go home with it. They want to sell it off, and you can just pick up the pieces you want. So good point. So Tobias, one thing to think about is that if they go too long together, my money would be on the Lavis out competing the Scaber, but you never know. It kind of depends on the situation, but I'm kind of thinking that's what would happen. So, and Frank the Tank, yes, it's awesome that Peter has he can source the captive bred babies sometimes. My first vinegarins that I ever got were captive bred babies as well, and I think we need to have more breeding in captivity. I think I would love to try breeding vinegarins sometime. Oh, Kimberly, you're actually close to Biodude. That's right. I didn't realize you were that close. I knew you were in the same state as Biodude, but the fact that you can go and visit in person, that's super cool. I'd love to do that if I ever come to Texas. That's going to be on my list. I've been to Texas, but it's been a long time. When I was a kid, I used to visit my grandma and some other relatives in Texas. So that was fun. Here, let me see if I can stop this sound. There we go. I would love to visit Texas again, and that would be one of the reasons. Theropod Hunter. I'm not sure if I've seen the Borneo vinegaroon, but I have seen some of the tropical ones. They're pretty cool. Oh yeah, so Kimberly, I've found that the Terra Sahara works. It's working great for mine, so it's worth a shot. That's actually what I'm using for my Brazilian Blue Dwarf Beauty too. Same substrate, the Biodude Terra Sahara. So yeah, let me know if you try some of that out with it. It seems to work pretty well. Yeah, it varies widely if you can get good deals at your pet shops. I find that I don't buy cork at pet shops because it's too expensive, but if you do a bulk order, like you buy like $100 worth of cork bark, you can usually get a decent amount for a decent price. But yeah, if you just buy small pieces or one or two pieces, it's not going to work. So I think I saw Tennyson a comment that Secobria Tropical Pinks, is that the one? I think I saw that one. Yeah, I've got a reptile expo coming up, and the only problem is whenever I'm behind a table, I never really get out and go around the expo much, and then I always regret that I didn't because I'm too busy. But I always want to go around the expo, and I'll say to someone, like someone who came with me, I'll say, okay, can I go around for 5 minutes? And then I do, but then I come back, and that's about all I get the whole time. And so sometime I need to go to an expo and just wander around and actually attend the expo instead of being at a table. Even though it's fun to be at a table and it's more lucrative to be at a table, you end up with more money than you left with, than you arrived with if you sit behind a table, and if you don't, you usually end up with far less money. So there's that. But I do miss going around all the tables, gotta say. It looks like we only have about 10 minutes left. Did anybody else have other questions you want to talk about? So Rod, you have quite a few different isopods. I am in a place where I can really only find Armadillidium vulgare most of the time around my house. I used to find Porcellio scaber when I was a kid not too far from here, but I don't see them anymore really. And Onychus ocellus I've never seen in my state. Silisticus convexus I've seen twice, 2 different locations in my state. One was in this very backyard in which, this backyard of this house, years ago. Saw them once. Never saw them again, interestingly. But the stock of Silisticus convexus that I have that is not Ukraine pied comes from the descendants. I collected about 10 of them at the time and got them breeding, and I've had them ever since. But of course, that's I also have Ukraine pied from a completely different collection site. So expos. One thing about expos that frustrates me is the crowds and the struggle to get to a table. That can be an issue too. So Aunt Sandy Skinks, does your rubber ducky video show how to check them for gender? Not specifically for rubber duckies. I do have a video on the breeding for morphs, I believe. That video has some close-up photos of isopods and how to tell. And those methods work for rubber duckies too. Although because rubber duckies conglobate, you basically need to put them in a clear container and look from beneath, usually with a good light. But the method still holds true. So I believe it's in the breeding morphs video, and I used Hoffman zygi because they're so big and it's easy to tell, but you can use the same method. So Tennyson, you found Silisticus convexus and Heber in the Uintas. Cool. I should look next time I'm up in that area. Oh, and Kimberly, yeah, the isopods I found in Arizona, those were they're Porcellio laevis, but they appear to be the type of Porcellio laevis that Oren mentioned in his book that are very adapted, because he found some in the Sonoran Desert, if I'm not mistaken, that were very well adapted to handling dry conditions. And when we were there, we found some, and they seem to be doing well. I don't think they've reproduced yet. I need to check on them again, but I've set them up, and yeah, they seem to be doing really well. I'm excited about that because then people will ask me, what kind of isopods do you have for desert environments? And I do have some good picks like Porcellionides purinosus, but I think that desert, probably call it something like Porcellio laevis Sonoran Desert as the locality, and that will be a good option as well. So Serena, apple cores tend to be safe for isopods to eat. Preferably you will have washed the apple well beforehand to remove any possible pesticide contamination, at least reduce it. And that should be true for most. There are a lot of different vegetables and fruits that I've given isopods. It tends to be a good idea to go really easy on fruit. Only provide fruit if it's something, a quantity the isopods can eat in a very short period of time, because the fruits tend to be fairly likely to mold, and they also can attract pests really readily. So if I have this culture and it has 1,000 dairy cows in it, and I throw an apple core in there, it's going to be gone in an hour or less. So that's fine. But if I have half a dozen isopods in this container, I'm going to throw this apple core in there, you might end up dealing with mold or with pests and things like that. So hopefully that helps. I would say there's really not very many things that isopods won't eat if they're hungry, and it's available. So I've heard of people giving them like jalapeno peppers, and they're fine with it, and they like to eat those. It's just, if I knew that something was heavily contaminated with pesticides and it was hard to peel or otherwise cleanse of such things, I probably hesitate to feed it. Yeah, random tea zucchini is one of my go-tos. I typically grow a lot of zucchini and summer squash, and often winter squash, and those are some of my favorite things to feed isopods, because they will really go after them. They don't mold as readily as some things. They don't attract pests as readily as some things. So I really like them. Oh yeah, so Tennyson, yep, the cheap dog food. I learned that from Kyle. You probably learned that from Kyle. And I use a lot of cheap dog food with a lot of my creatures. My isopods really go after it. But I also, of course, use Supreme Isopod Chow as a main supplementary food for my isopods. But sweet potato, squash, zucchini, pumpkin, green peas, canned green beans. Those are some of my big go-tos. Yeah, the zucchini is seriously a good one. So Major's saying the same thing too. Cool. All right. We've got a few minutes left. It's been fun to catch up with everybody here a little bit. Any other comments you have, questions you have? I'm excited to share the Sky Island adventures that I had with you all as soon as I can. It's been a challenging thing to get everything edited and released in time. I'm kind of worried about getting everything done by Friday, but I'm only doing one video on Friday. I'm not even sure that's the one I'm going to release yet. We'll see. But I will be releasing a video on Friday, whether or not it's the Sky Island Adventures, but that'll be coming soon. And the Beetle Guy, you may be late, but you were here. Frank the Tank, do the Hermit the Frog impersonation. Hermit the Frog, I've never heard of Hermit the Frog. How are the Blue Death Fainters? Seem to be doing well. I've got what appear to be larvae. Well, I did find a Blue Death Fainter larvae in there a while ago. I need to go through the substrate now and see how big they are and how many there are. Maybe separate some. Oh yeah, Kimberly. Cool. I say hi to Keith as well. It was really fun to hang out with him as well. That was a fun group, fun time, and it's one of those things. As soon as I get back on the plane, I'm like, oh, when can I come back next time? I gotta go do that. So really cool to hang out with people like you and Keith that just really appreciated all the critters. You know, it's not common to meet people like that in real life, and getting to do that was super fun. So where was I? What was I saying? Oh, okay, sorry, got confused for a second. But anyway, yeah, Kimberly and Keith, it was great to hang out with you. So much fun. So much fun. Okay, so Frank the Tank is saying Kermit the Frog. Well, I'm not warmed up on my Kermit the Frog voice. I'm not warmed up at all. And I do have to warm up typically to do a decent job, but we can see. Hi-ho, Kermit the Frog here. How's that? It's not perfect, but that's without a warm-up, so not terrible, I guess. Let's see. So not too bad, even though I didn't warm up, huh? I'll take it. All right, well, everyone, I should bring my Kermit puppet sometime. Should I bring my Kermit puppet sometime and do that with Kermit? That would be fun. I think so. Oh yes, Theropod Hunter. I actually enjoy green beans for feeding Clue Guy as well. And I will second that. The green beans for most of my isopods, but I like the canned green beans for the isopods myself, and the Clue Guy do really like them. So, all right, well, it's about time to do a room tour and do the whole thing in Kermit voice. I don't know if my throat would manage that, but that would be fun. Okay, so Kimberly's voting. What does Keith say? Does Keith say I should do it as well? Do the Kermit, bring the Kermit puppet in? If Keith says that I should do it, and Kimberly both say that, if you both are in agreement, then I think I have to just bring the Kermit puppet in at some point. And we have some other votes too. So, but honestly, since Kimberly requested it and Major has requested it, Andrea's requested it, Sean's requested it. Okay, I'm gonna have to do it. A lot of people have done it. And Frank the Tank, just as a parting shot here, I've got to go, but I have eaten Vegemite on toast. Kind of liked it. So, all right. Orin McMonagle book reading in Kermit voice. Okay, Frank votes for the puppet as well. Okay. Well, thank you all. It was great to see you, Kimberly and Keith, here in the stream too, after having met you in person. That's really fun. And I'm just grateful for all of you being here. It looks like Keith says 100%. Okay, puppet's coming. I'm not sure when, but I promise I'll do the Kermit puppet on screen at some point in the not too distant future. Thank you all again for joining, and I'll see you later.